Hello, everyone. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. We've got some people still joining. Welcome to all those that are joining us this morning. We do still have quite a few people joining, so we'll give just a couple minutes for some additional people to join a minute or two late, and then we will get our party started today. All right. Still a few more people joining. Give it about another minute or so. Welcome to those that are joining. We're waiting just a minute or so more for a few other people to get logged in, and then we'll get started. All right, so we will go ahead and get started today. And we appreciate everyone who's joined. All right, hello, and welcome to our webinar on Scoro's new cost and profit forecasting functionality. If you're looking to better monitor the progress of your project cost against the budget to proactively keep an eye on your profit margin, you're in the right place, and we're happy to have you join us today. My name is Maggie Luce, and I'm a member of the service delivery team here at Scoro. My role allows me the pleasure of working with our clients, many of which have joined us on our session today, starting in the initial onboarding phase and continue to support our live clients to help them get the most value from Scoro. Speaking of the team, some of our amazing team members will be working in the background to answer your questions throughout the webinar today. Before we get started, we have two quick polls to find out a little bit more about how everyone is forecasting their cost and profit today. Think about the last project you lost money on. When did you discover that the project was going to be unprofitable? Right at the end, when all the work is done and it's too late to change anything? Towards the end, when we've almost used up the budget? Around halfway through, based on the project progress? At any point, you can accurately predict how profitable the project will be, or your projects are always profitable. Give everybody just a minute to get their answers in. Lots of you are quick, getting your answers in here really quickly. Give just a few more seconds. We still have a few more answers coming in. All right. Now we've got all of our answers and we'll share the results. So it looks like the largest percentage of our group today know if their project's going to be profitable about halfway through based on their project progress. And that's followed pretty closely by knowing that your project's going to be, or if it's going to be profitable right at the end. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. All right. Let's go and look at our second poll for today. And our second poll is multiple choice. So what did you do when it became clear that your project was going to be over budget? Select all the options that apply. Did you scale back the project scope and try to use cheaper resources? Did you try to negotiate more budget with the client? Did you just absorb the loss and try to finish on time? Or is it not an issue because your projects are always profitable? Do have a few more answers coming in here. And this one looks like it's going to be a bit closer on the results. All right, let's go ahead and end our poll and we can share those results. So this one's much closer. Kind of our top two winning options are that we are absorbing the loss and we're just trying to finish on time, or we're going back to try and negotiate more budget with the client. We do have some of our team, our attendees today that also scale back their project and or tried to use cheaper resources. Interesting. Thank you guys for sharing. We appreciate the insight and how you guys are managing this today. Let's take a quick pit stop and look at our agenda for today. We will quickly chat through a few housekeeping items. Then we'll have an overview of what we mean by cost and profit forecasting and why it's important. We'll then do a deeper dive into the functionality with a live demo. We'll cover how your existing workflows may or may not need to change if you start using cost and profit forecasting. And then we'll finish up with a summary of the key takeaways. We'll have a few minutes of Q&A, and we'll ask for some feedback on our webinar today. I'm going to do my best to get through our materials in about 45 minutes so you can take a break between now and your next meeting. At any point during the webinar, please feel free to ask questions via the Q&A button on the bottom of Zoom. The questions will be hidden initially until we've had a chance to answer it. Then the answer will be posted and publicly visible for everyone. If the question requires a bit more of a thorough response, we'll get in touch with you directly after the webinar. So please don't ask questions anonymously, otherwise we won't know who to follow up with. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll each get a copy after the webinar in case you want to rewatch or share with any of your colleagues. The cost and profit forecasting feature, like some of our other more advanced features, is only available in the Pro and Ultimate plans using the new project view, and it is not available in the Essential or Standard plans. Finally, this report will only be available to users that already have access to Project Profit in their permission sets. So this information can be limited or hidden based on your user's permissions. For those of you that have already been using the budget charts and projects, you may be thinking, don't we already have charts for this data? It has been possible to monitor budget burn in Scoro using Scoro's budget charts prior to the introduction of the forecasting functionality. However, tracking budget burn alone is not enough if you want to proactively protect your project profit. Budget burn tells you how much of the allocated budget has been spent, but what it has not been able to tell you is if you're overspending internally. Because in the end, your profit is determined by how much the client pays you versus your internal cost. So it's important to track the cost dimension, as good cost management helps you achieve your desired profit margin. Project-related costs are a combination of internal and external cost. Things like our internal team's time, outside contractors or freelancers, or purchases required to deliver what we promised to the client. If you subtract both of these costs from the final invoiceable sum, you get the project's profit. But once the project is done, the final profit's just that, it's final, and you have little control over it in hindsight. That's why we're adding another forward-looking measure into the mix, your forecasted profit. The new cost and profit forecasting will act like your own personal crystal ball to help you look into the future at any stage of the project and understand where you're likely to end up profit-wise based on all the internal and external costs that are still to come. And why is this important? If our costs start to inflate due to scope creep, errors, or overservicing, we may not realize the project is going off the rails from a cost perspective until it's too late, possibly leading to a situation where the project loses money. There's nothing worse than looking back and thinking, man, there could have been some easy thing that I could have done to save this project. If we can understand our upcoming project cost, we can identify issues brewing earlier in the process, allowing us to make changes and keep us on target for what we quoted to the client. It's vital to see exactly where these problems are going to pop up, whether it's a specific role that has too many tasks lined up for them, or whether the recent changes in the project team are going to eat into the profits, or maybe some services that we've sold for a fixed rate will require more time and resources than anticipated, all potentially reducing your margins. While the amount we invoice may be typically fixed, there's flexibility to adjust those internal costs if the project manager is aware of potential problem areas and necessary changes. This enables project managers to deliver profitable projects by allowing them to closely monitor the cost budget and forecast the likely project profit way before the project has come to an end. With all that in mind, we built a set of features to show what your project's future is going to look like, so you don't end up with any nasty surprises when it's too late to change anything. We revised the Budget Health tab in the project view to now include charts and metrics that help you manage the cost budget. The charts now feature both the budget and cost dimensions laid out over a timeline or broken down based on roles or deliverables. The profit table in the project view has also been revised and now shows the forecasted values for each of the revenue and cost categories to really understand the likely end result of your project. Project list views and the WIP report have also been updated with the forecasted profit metrics to see things on a portfolio level and keep track of multiple projects at once. So without further ado, let's see the cost and profit forecasting in action. As I'm switching over to my Scoro site, please remember to add any questions you may have to the Q&A and check out the answers to the questions our other attendees have already asked. First, let's look at where we can find the new functionality, beginning with the project list. In addition to the project profit field you've always used, you can now also monitor the forecasted profit using Scoro's new forecasted profit data column. If we hover over each column header, you can see what data is included in each calculation. The project profit column will continue to show the actual profit, taking into consideration the invoices we've issued and subtracting out our final cost. The new forecasted profit column, on the other hand, is calculated by subtracting out our forecasted cost from our forecasted revenue. When we navigate into a specific project, we can find additional forecasting details in the Budget tab. The Budget Health tab has been updated to include both the overall project budget, or the sell price, as well as information on the estimated project cost. In the burn chart, This is represented by the teal line for the overall project budget or your sale price, and the separate purple line for the budgeted cost. The shaded area in between indicates your project profit margin. Dotted lines indicate your forecast, and solid lines, which we'll see a little bit more of in here in just a moment, indicate your actual data. We've also added budget metric cards below the burn chart to answer the following questions. How much of the budget have we used to date? How much of the budget will we have burned through by the end of the project? How much actual cost have we incurred to date? How much cost will we have incurred by the end of the project? And finally, what is the forecasted profit margin by the end of the project? If we continue scrolling, we will see the revised breakdown chart. This chart shows a breakdown of monetary resource burn. The stacked bar chart follows the same three-stage logic as before. Horizontal lines indicate the budget, hashed columns for the forecast, solid columns for the actual data. But now the data has been expanded to show both the cost and budget categories in the pop-up box. These categories include actual value to date, forecasted value at completion, and the budgeted value. Until now, this chart only populated data if you were using role-based pricing. But now, the chart will vary based on if your project is role-based or service-based. Service-based projects are now supported and will show the breakdown by service. And both role-based and service-based projects will now have the added bonus of including columns for outsourced cost, like the printing column we see in the middle here. Role-based projects will continue to show the breakdown by roles, as we can see in this other project example. On either of these charts, red hash lines indicate your actual forecast or over budget, or your forecasted is over budget. Solid red indicates your actual cost or over budget. If we scroll back to the top of the project, the quoted versus actual and the revenue tabs will remain unchanged. But we have retooled the profit table to reflect the overall forecasted data as well. If we take a quick jump over to the reports module and scroll down to the WIP report, the WIP report now includes an additional forecasted profit column as well. Now let's see these charts work in action. For our example today, we are going to look at a quote for a website design. We will design and develop a website. We'll need a little bit of project management. And this client has asked for a website animation, which we do not have the resources for in-house, so we will have an outside firm complete that work for us. Once the client signs off on the quote, we will convert the quote to a project. I'll start by setting some dates for the work to be completed. Once the project has been created, Scoro automatically creates bookings for the roles and users we included in the quote. We can adjust the bookings to reflect when we expect the work to be completed. Bookings are a relatively new feature in Scoro, so if you're interested in learning more about integrating them into your workflow, there is a great webinar hosted by my colleague Helen available in our Help Center. And she's also hosting another webinar on Scoro's new bookings module next month. Now let's go take a look at the cost and profit chart just after the project has been created by returning to the Budget tab. Once the project is created, Scoro will show a line for the overall project budget, which is our top teal line, and a line for the budgeted cost, which is the top purple line. Our shaded area in between indicates our project profit margin. Because we have added bookings, Scoro uses the labor cost associated with the bookings to indicate the approximate project cost. You can see the gradual rise in the cost lines as the timeline progresses. At this early stage in the project, everything's looking good. So now let's return to the quote and we'll add some tasks to our project. As the tasks are populating into my project, let's discuss a few points regarding bookings and tasks. The charts we're discussing today are only as good as the data that feeds them. If the data in your project is not correct or kept up to date, then your forecast will not be accurate or reliable. It is important that your project managers understand this and keep on top of the internal time plans. It is also worth mentioning that while future bookings and future tasks both generate future cost, we are not double reporting the cost if you have both on your project. Scoro compares the total forecasted cost of your bookings against the total forecasted cost of the tasks to determine which is highest, thereby giving you a realistic forecast of your total in-house cost. As we begin to understand when the specific tasks on our project need to be completed, we can adjust the task details and set specific dates. I find this easiest to do from the Gantt chart, so let me adjust a few things on our view, and we'll set some dates on our tasks. Project management is going to run for the totality of our project, and Jane is going to take point. Kevin, our designer, is going to be responsible for all of our design work, and that will need to be done very early on so that the designs are ready for when John, our developer, can begin working on the back-end development work. John's work will take approximately the back 2/3 of our timeline to complete. Now, the last piece of our initial setup is to issue a purchase order for that animation. And I'm going to return to the quote and create our purchase order directly from there. Thanks to a new feature in our purchases site settings, the purchase order can now count as forecasted cost and directly affect the cost line in the budget chart. If I scroll down a bit, I can now see how that same budget is distributed across the roles and our outsourced services, so I can track how each part is progressing and contributing to my cost. Let's fast forward a bit to see what happens after some time has passed on our project. A few weeks have passed and the project's progressing nicely. Kevin has finished all of our design work. John is starting to work on the development. And Jane has been meeting with the client weekly to update them on progress. Now, when we return to the budget tab, we see a very different picture. Instead of only seeing the dotted lines, we see solid lines representing the finalized cost of our labor. If I scroll down to the breakdown chart, I can now see the finalized cost broken down by role as well. Teal representing the sellable value of the work, and purple representing the cost. Now, this afternoon, I received a call from the client, and they're asking for a few revisions to the design work that Kevin's already completed. After discussing the request with the team, we decide to complete the revisions for free and not revise the scope. These revisions will take about 10 hours in total. We'll need to get them done by next week. And our revisions will be completed by John and Kevin. Kevin will do about 3 hours, need about 3 hours to revise the design work, and it'll take John about 7 hours to revise the development. Navigating back to the budget tab, I can see how this pro bono decision directly affects my project profit. My costs have now increased, but my budget is still the same, so I'll be making less profit than I had originally planned. My pro bono offer also has another unintended consequence. I now have to change the animation, and my vendor has told me this is going to increase the cost by about $500. So I'll come in here and revise my budget, reissue the purchase order over to my vendor. Really starting to regret saying yes to all this free work. Now, when I return to the project, I can foresee the damage. If nothing changes, I will be over my cost budget in a couple weeks, and it will really start to begin to cut into my profit. As I'm sitting here mulling over my life choices, I hear from Kevin. As he was preparing to start working on these revisions, he realized there was an error in the original file that he had created, and it took him a few hours to go back and revise the file to fix it. This put him a couple hours over the amount of time that I'd originally allocated for him to do the revisions on the project. So as I prepare myself mentally to go back to the budget chart and prepare myself for the bad news, I scroll down to the breakdown chart, and it's bad. It's real bad. Now, when I look at my cost for Kevin's time, Kevin's mistake added $300 of extra cost to my already at-risk project. The cost and profit chart has shown me the issue early enough that I know something needs to change, and it's time for a meeting with the team to come up with a new plan to recover some of this lost cause. Bringing in our junior developer, Lucas, enables us to complete the development work at a cheaper rate. And this will allow us to recover some of that lost cause. We'll swap out John for Lucas on our revisions. And Lucas will now be responsible for completing the balance of the development work. After revising our internal budget, when I return back to the budget tab, we're almost back on plan. And I'm feeling a little bit better about this quote unquote free work that we agreed to. After our adjustments, we are now only losing 3% of our profit overall. Thankfully, I was able to see this issue ahead of time and make changes now before I ended up in an unprofitable situation when it was too late to change anything. Making these changes proactively allowed us to satisfy the customer. We were able to forecast this far enough ahead to make the changes and still make money. And ultimately, everyone leaves happy. So now that we've salvaged our project, let's recap at what we looked at in our live demo. We started with a quote and created a project from the quote in just a few clicks, which created a number of automatic bookings. We adjusted the timeline of the bookings, which directly affected the new cost and profit burndown chart. Adding tasks to the project further defined the cost and profit lines in the chart. Remember that data hygiene is important, and if the data in your project is not correct or kept up to date, then your forecast will not be accurate or reliable. It's important to keep on top of internal time plans. The burn down charts will not double report cost if you have both bookings and tasks on your project. Scoro compares the total forecasted of the two to determine which is highest and gives you a realistic forecast of your total in-house cost. Purchase orders can now be defined as a forecasted cost and influence the project cost burn before the bill ever arrives from the supplier. As changes happen during the life of the project, the budget burn will take those changes into account and indicate if the costs are forecasted to rise above what was estimated, allowing you to see issues ahead of time and adjust accordingly. If you have any questions about any of the areas we've covered today, feel free to add them to the chat below. As we switch back over to our presentation, For quick reference, let's review all of the areas where you can find the new cost and profit forecasting data in Scoro. In addition to the historical project profit column, the project list now includes a forecasted profit column. If your Scoro plan also includes the WIP report, we've added the forecasted profit column to that report as well. Your main source of cost and profit forecasting data can be found in the budget tab of a project. The burn chart now shows your budget burn as well as the cost burn. The breakdown chart has been revised to include the forecasted data and will now show columns regardless of if your project is role-based or service-based. It now also includes outside purchases as well. Last but certainly not least, the profit tab in your project has been redesigned to include the overall project forecast as well. If you like the sound of better forecasting your project cost and profit so that you don't end up in an unprofitable situation when it's too late to change anything, and you want to start using it in Scoro, what will this mean for your current workflows? The good news is if you're already using Scoro, then you're probably already doing most, if not all of these steps for the report to already start showing you valuable information. Let's look at a checklist of items that influence the cost and profit report and see how many of these items you're already using in your projects today. Are the following areas of your Scoro site set up? Do you have labor cost for each user and/or role in your organization, so your quotes and projects reflect the accurate internal cost of your team? Do you have roles set up and created, so you can understand the teams that are working on a project and how many hours have been allocated for each? Please note that roles are not mandatory, and the cost and profit forecast will still work without roles being set up, but when roles are available, you get better insights and accuracy. If you use purchase orders, consider turning on the new purchase order setting so your purchases are included in your project forecast. From a project perspective, your project should have a quote to establish the budget and your budgeted cost. Are you using either bookings and/or tasks to forecast when the work needs to be completed and by whom? You're tracking time in Scoro to add the actual cost to your project. If you want to better forecast outside purchases, create purchase orders for each outside purchase you plan to make. When the vendor invoice arrives, make sure the bill is added to the project. If your team has project expenses, make sure those costs are being added to the project as well. Are there any of these items that you're not using today but would like help learning how to set up? Scoro's customer success team is happy to help you learn more about these features and can be reached at success@scoro.com. We've covered a lot today, so I'll take just a minute to sum up the key takeaways. The cost and profit chart can help you understand the future project cost so you don't end up in an unprofitable situation when it's too late to change anything. There is minimal to no configuration required for the cost and profit chart to start working. The data you're already using in Scoro, quotes, tasks, time entries, bills, etc., will now be even more powerful in helping you understand if your projects might become unprofitable in the future. It is especially relevant for flat fee projects, where following the budget burn through cost makes more sense than following the budget burn through selling prices. The cost and profit forecasting feature is only available in our Pro and Ultimate plans using the new project view. And finally, this is available to users that already have access to Project Profit in their permission sets. So this information can be limited or hidden based on your user's permissions. Thank you all for staying with us through the presentation and our demo today. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope it's been insightful. If you haven't done so already, drop your questions in the Q&A section below. We've had some great ones come in already, and I'll take a moment to highlight a few. I'll also be addressing some of the most common queries we've received during the webinar. For those of you whose questions we might not get to today, don't worry. We will follow up with you individually after the webinar to ensure all your questions are answered. Additionally, the recording of this session, along with the Q&A, will be shared with you, so you can review it at your convenience or share it with your team. Now, I'll head back over to my Scoro site so we can dive into a few of your questions. All right. So our first question for today asks, you've talked about bookings, tasks, and time entries. Will they not overlap on the forecast? This is a great question. When both tasks and bookings are available on your project in Scoro, Scoro will take the higher cost of the two, which may mean that some of your cost forecast is being pulled from bookings and other portions of the same cost line may be pulled from your tasks. Whichever is highest will be the data that is used. And this is meant to give you the most realistic understanding of your cost forecast. All right. Give just a minute as our team is sending over the next question for us to look at today. Okay, so our next question is asking about roles. So I've never used roles in my site. How are they used in Scoro, and do I have to set them up in my site? Great question. Roles were initially introduced in Scoro to allow customers to sell their work using role-based pricing. And role-based pricing, which is available right here in your quote, basically allows you the option of pricing your work using your resources instead of a cost for a service. So if we look at an example in my site today, let's say that for role-based pricing, I would sell my senior developer's work at $200 an hour or my junior developer's work at $150 an hour, versus if I were a service-based pricing option, I would just be selling development at $150 an hour of a blended rate between the two. We've since expanded this functionality so that everyone can gain valuable insights from using roles, not just those that decide to price using our role-based pricing. On quotes, you can now choose a specific role instead of a user, and this will give you a better understanding of your possible margin based on the role that will be completing the work, instead of just having to select a specific person to understand that margin. If we navigate over to our reports module, we can now go over to our utilization report, because our utilization report now has an option to filter down to specific roles. This is not a great example of my test site because I only have one user per role, but effectively what this allows you to do is you can filter down to your role and see the utilization or the availability of the different users by role within your site. The last thing we'll look at today is the detailed work report, which now also offers the option to be grouped by roles, so you can understand how much time is associated with each role, as well as their cost, including the labor cost by role and your earned revenue, which is your sell equivalent as well. All right, our next question's already ready. Does the forecasting tool account for unexpected costs, such as project scope changes or unforeseen external expenses? Well, let's go back over to our project. Scope changes will be accounted for in a couple different ways. If your team understands that some of this work is going to take longer than we had originally anticipated, so let's say my project management is not going to be 15 hours, I know it's actually going to be 20. If I save this task with a longer duration, then this duration will be added to our estimated cost in the burn down chart. If the tasks are not updated, then the cost will only be reflected once the time is actually tracked against a task in a project. External expenses can be forecasted if you turn on the new purchase order setting in the back end. And that forecasted data will be represented most clearly in the breakdown chart at the bottom down here. Now, our next question is actually following up on the new purchase order setting. And the question asks, you mentioned a new PO setting. Where is that located and how does it work? Do POs now count as actual cost in the project or just forecasted cost and will still need to add bills for the actual cost? The new purchase order setting mentioned earlier today can be found in your site settings. It's located in the sales and finance section, third down in the purchases area. The new setting's just about in the middle of the page here, and it's called Consider Purchase Orders as Committed Cost. This setting does not count the PO value as an actual cost. It just allows the forecasted cost within the forecast charts to be included. And these are going to be in any of the areas that we have talked about forecasted information being available. The project list, the budget tab within your project, your burn down charts, the profit tab, the WIP report, all of that information will be included there. You do still need to add bills to your project to account for the actual cost, as this checkbox is only allowing your purchase orders to be included as part of the forecast. It looks like we have enough time for about one more question. All right, and that question has come through. All right, our last question for today is going to ask, does the cost forecast consider individual time allocation if the labor costs are different per individual? All right, well, we'll go back down to our website design project and we will go look at our client revisions task that we created earlier. If you are using individual allocation within your site, which basically allows you the option to dictate different amounts of time for the users that you have assigned to a task, Scoro will actually look at the amount of time that has been associated with each user. So 3 hours of design time for Kevin and 7 hours of development time for junior developer Lucas, and take the labor costs associated with each. And that is the value that will be included in the cost and profit forecast charts. Thank you so much for all your questions today. And if there are any that you thought of as we've been going through this, please continue to add them to the chart or to the Q&A down below as our team is still continuing to answer questions. Now we've reached the end of our time today, so we have one last poll that we'd love to get your feedback on how we've done today so that we can look to continue to improve things as we move forward. We're getting the pop-up ready for you now. And this is also going to be multiple choice today. So please choose any of the options that apply. I will use cost and profit forecasting and can see its value. I may use cost and profit forecasting, but still need to figure out if it's a good fit for my company. I will not use cost and profit forecasting. I found the webinar useful and easy to understand. The webinar could be improved. We'll leave the poll open for everyone to make their choices, so there's no time limit. Tick all that apply. That's going to wrap up our webinar for today. In terms of getting more help and support, our Help Center article has a step-by-step guide for how to start using the cost and profit forecasting. But if you find that you get stuck and need support, you can email our amazing support team at help@scoro.com. We love hearing from our clients whenever we release new features like the cost and profit forecasting. If you have any ideas, suggestions, or comments, we've added an in-product pop-up to the Project Budget tab for your feedback. You can also reach out to us directly at help@scoro.com and send that feedback to our support team as well. Finally, don't forget to follow Scoro on LinkedIn to hear about our upcoming webinars and events, including our bookings module webinar next month. We'll send you these links in the follow-up email along with the link to the recording. And if you've asked a question we haven't had a chance to respond to yet, we'll follow up with you separately in the next few days. That's it for now. On behalf of myself and my wonderful team working behind the scenes today, thank you so much for your time. We hope it was valuable and to see you guys again soon. Bye, everybody.